LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the October 13th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm doing here. Because tonight I picked out the weekend's 11 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be a really educational, fair use, media criticism, and political commentary show for you all tonight. I have put a link down in the video description to a clip list where you can follow along with my notes on the clips. I'm not in my regular studio tonight, which is why I couldn't print my clip list. I'm gonna have to follow along in a PDF, just like anyone else who wants to follow along in a PDF. And impeachment is again the main topic I'm covering this week, as it looks increasingly certain that Trump will be impeached this year, with additional criminality revealed this week involving Rudy Giuliani and some of his Ukrainian associates, including one guy who, last week Matthew Broderick was the guest host on Saturday Night Live, and there were a whole bunch of Ferris Bueller references. Well, isn't there this one guy who's like a reference to the Sausage King of Chicago? I'll talk about that a little more from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But I also want to make sure, then I will also have for political comedy, in addition to that one joke I just made, in the first couple minutes of Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live last night, and I'll get to that in a moment. But I also want to make sure you stay tuned until the end of the live show, where I'll have a Bernie Sanders clip, fresh back from his heart attack, and he actually takes on Elizabeth Warren, I voted for Bernie Sanders back in 2016 in the primary, but now I'm kind of leaning towards Elizabeth Warren, so I'm interested to see him taking on Elizabeth Warren for being a capitalist to her bones. That's the final clip I'll show, which is kind of a preview of the Democratic debate next Tuesday. And I'll briefly discuss the crisis for the Syrian Kurds that Donald Trump created this week, because it was covered by the corporate media. And I'll briefly discuss that, and I'll explain along the way why I'm not in my regular studio here. Without my regular background, and there's all this stuff around me, but first, as promised, I want to show you this political comedy clip from the first couple of minutes of Saturday Night Live Weekend Update last night, which showed a significant crack in Trump's support that you can see in the thumbnail that I used for my video here, a Fox News poll that showed 51% favoring impeachment of Trump. You can see, of course, my Impeach Trump t-shirt. I'm still working on getting a version that I can send out to my patrons, but 51% favor impeachment, and then there's some details about these Rudy Giuliani associates, including Igor Fruman, I guess part of the Abe Fruman Sausage King of Chicago clan. And you'll also see in the Weekend Update clip something that didn't make it into any of the actual news analysis show news summaries I'm going to show later. Some details that are like it's like truth is stranger than fiction details about these Ukrainians. And I also cut out a little bit of copyrighted music. The boys are back in town, when they show Trump with Igor Fruman and Lev Parnas, the Ukrainians indicted this week. And I'll talk about all of that a little more with you after we watch that first clip together over here.
Well, according to a Fox News poll, 51% of Americans support impeaching President Trump. And it's bad, because Fox News barely talked about their own poll. I saw the poll all over MSNBC, and when I flipped over to Fox News, they were decorating cakes. Meanwhile, on CNN, I saw this headline: Trump loses 5 court cases in one day as he distances himself from Giuliani, and then I couldn't read anymore. It's never good when there's so much bad news CNN has to switch to a smaller font to fit it all. And it's definitely about to get worse for Trump because of these two Shreks. Two Soviet-born associates of Rudy Giuliani, Igor Fruman and Lev Parnas, who were somehow not killed by John Wick, were arrested at Dulles Airport in Washington for allegedly funneling Russian money to the Trump campaign, which, as you might have guessed, is very illegal. And before Trump says, "I don't even know these guys," here's a quick slideshow I put together. God, they photograph well. Giuliani's two associates are also successful entrepreneurs. Igor, the handsome one, owns a club in Ukraine that's called Mafia Rave, which I think counts as a full confession. And then Lev, the shy one, owns a security business called, I swear to you, Fraud Guaranteed. And so my guarantee is that Trump is about to lose court case number 6.
First of all, bravo to the casting agency that found these two thumb breakers. They look like they use vodka as cologne. These guys have definitely worn tracksuits to their daughter's wedding. I know these are easy jokes, but I'm just surprised that these guys were helping the president and not, I don't know, helping George Costanza get that Frogger machine across the street.
So what do you think? Ooh, that was a weird noise. So that was the Saturday Night Live weekend update. Like I said, they showed that Fox News poll that I talked about before I showed the clip. I know I'm in this weird shadow here. Let me see if I can get the camera to... No, whatever. Wait, maybe if I go back like the sun is setting. I'm like looking straight into the sunset there. So in a few minutes, all the light will equalize. You'll probably get less of a shadow on my face. I'm not in my home studio. I do have the new Jim Crow. Let's see if I lean over towards the new Jim Crow. Over my shoulder here, that's my one book that I brought with me. But behind me, you see this bay here in California where the sun sets. Not on the water, but I'll talk about that later as to where I am and why I have this weird background around me. But the one thing I wanted to point out about the Saturday Night Live news summary you saw there is that they actually reported on a couple details. I don't know, maybe because they're more comedic, but one of those Ukrainians owned a club called Mafia Rave, and another one was in a company called Fraud Guarantee. I mean, that's like truth is stranger than fiction. Is that comedy, or should that have been reported in the news summaries? I don't know. But one thing that I wanted to point out about Fox News that happened this week, even though I was kind of traveling, that's why I'm out here in these strange environs, is that one of the few straight news anchors on Fox News, and it's kind of funny because he's actually a gay man, but he's a straight news anchor on Fox News. Straight news meaning not biased political propaganda like most of the rest of Fox News. So Shepard Smith, he quit on Friday, and there's some weird Fox News thing going on where the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr, went and met with Rupert Murdoch, the head of Fox News, the News Corp chair. And Trump has been complaining that Fox News isn't, the coverage isn't obsequious enough. And so Shepard Smith is gone. I don't know if there's any sort of connection there, but one of the few other people on Fox News, there's like Chris Wallace, there's Judge Napolitano sometimes will give some actual legal analysis showing that Trump has committed more crimes or impeachable offenses or abuse of power. And Chris Wallace, actually, I think that's why I decided to show the Fox News Sunday news summary first. they actually, like most of the news programs, they led with what's going on in Turkey. And I am going to talk a little bit more about that when I show some of the Turkey, Syria, Kurd coverage a little later, very brief coverage. But I skipped that on Fox News because they covered that at the beginning. But then like 43 minutes into the show, 42 minutes into the show, Chris Wallace did this introduction about the impeachment news. And actually, I think, along with Kevin Corke, gave the most facts about impeachment compared to, well, I mean, NBC News Meet the Press actually did a really good news summary about impeachment that I'll show next. So I can't say it's the best, but given it's the best thing you're going to see on Fox News this week about impeachment, especially now that Shepard Smith is gone, I guess, is the point I was trying to make. And I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch the Fox News news summary about impeachment from about 40 minutes or so into the Fox News Sunday program over here.
You're running a country. I just don't think that you can have all of these people testifying about every conversation you've had.
The president announcing this week an end to any cooperation with the House impeachment inquiry. But in the last few days, Mr. Trump is being urged to cut ties with his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Amid reports, the mayor is now under investigation for his work in Ukraine. Let's get the latest from Kevin Corke at the White House. Kevin.
Chris asked this weekend whether or not he was still the president's attorney. Rudy Giuliani told Fox News, yes, but there are new questions about just how long that might be the case.
I stand behind Rudy Giuliani, absolutely.
In 6 words, President Trump put to rest any speculation that he's turning his back on his private attorney, Rudy Giuliani. And while no one knows for certain, the New York Times reports the former New York City mayor is now squarely at the center of an impeachment probe, thanks to his ties to 2 foreign nationals, Parnas and Igor Fruman, arrested and charged with campaign finance violations stemming from what prosecutors allege was a pressure campaign to investigate Democrats.
Defendants broke the law to gain political influence while avoiding disclosure of who was actually making the donations and where the money was coming from.
Meanwhile, former Ukrainian Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, who was recalled abruptly back in May, gave a closed-door deposition to 3 congressional committees investigating whether there are grounds to impeach the president. In her prepared remarks, Yovanovitch accused the State Department of bringing her back to Washington because of disinformation spread by people including the president's attorney. This just ahead of a week when even more officials are expected to testify, including U.S. Ambassador to the EU Gordon Sondland and Fiona Hill, who was, until recently, President Trump's top aide on Russia and Europe. Sources tell the Washington Post that Sondland is expected to tell congressional lawmakers that the content of a text denying a quid pro quo with Ukraine came directly after a phone call from President Trump himself, although he is also expected to tell them, Chris, he's not sure if that's true or not.
Kevin Corke reporting from the White House. Kevin, thanks. And we're back now with the panel. Well, perhaps the biggest development, and there were a lot this week, was the arrest of those 2 associates, and there you see them, of Rudy Giuliani on campaign finance charges. Now, the New York Times reports federal prosecutors are investigating whether Giuliani failed to disclose he was lobbying in the U.S. on behalf of foreign officials. Here was President Trump being asked about Giuliani on Friday.
Well, I don't know. I haven't spoken to Rudy. I spoke to him yesterday briefly. He's a very good attorney, and he has been my attorney. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. So, Guy, the president did call in last night and say, yes, Giuliani is still his attorney, and he is a, quote, a great gentleman. That was the quote. But it doesn't seem that there's a ringing vote of confidence. Do you see a potential break?
Yeah, so Trump says that Rudy Giuliani has been his attorney. That's as actually even the right-wing commentators on Fox News pointed out. And I'm not going to show the pundits. I just wanted to show how Fox News did that news summary. But I think they gave a lot of the facts that are bad for the president in terms of this impeachment, and especially for Rudy Giuliani and his association with these Ukrainians, Igor Fruman and Parnas, who have been indicted by the Southern District of New York on campaign finance charges. And some people, SDNY, the Southern District of New York, is sometimes called the Sovereign District of New York because they are so independent from the U.S. Attorney, William Barr. I guess maybe they did this without his knowledge, or who knows. But some of the things Trump said there, as multiple pundits have pointed out, it's not original to me, have pointed out that what Trump is saying about Rudy Giuliani sounds a lot like what he once said about Michael Cohen, who's now in prison. And Rudy Giuliani is apparently under investigation by the Southern District of New York for criminality involving these Ukrainians. So this could be one of the many dominoes falling on Donald Trump's presidency. That remains to be seen, I guess. But like I said, that was a pretty good news summary from Fox News Sunday there, given that it's on Fox News. And I don't know if that means that Chris Wallace is on his way out, just like Shepard Smith, or what. That I guess remains to be seen, as they often say. But I don't think it was necessarily the best news summary. Here's the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, which, as usual, I think gives you the most facts about all the impeachment stuff that happened this week. You'll notice there are some references to what happened in Syria and Turkey and the Kurds. That broke at the end of several hours after I did my broadcast last Sunday. It was like 11 p.m. Sunday night. Trump talked to the president of Turkey, Erdogan, and they apparently worked out this deal where Turkey was going to invade Syria and cleanse these Kurdish areas. And some people have said this is one of many betrayals of the Kurds, going back to George H.W. Bush after the first Iraq war against Saddam Hussein, that left Saddam Hussein in power, and he then slaughtered the Kurds. But I'm going to point out why it goes back a lot longer than that. And you'll see some brief mention of that, along with a lot of, and I cut out the Richard Engel's full report with actual footage of atrocities, which I know YouTube doesn't want me to upload, but also because it's like original news footage reporting from Richard Engel that I can't really comment on much more than the commentary I'll give about how our betrayal of the Kurds actually goes back more like 100 years, and I'll discuss that a little more with you after we watch the Meet the Press news summary with Chuck Todd. First, giving a little introduction, and then I'm going to cut out most of the footage from Syria, and then back to Chuck Todd for the package about impeachment. Over here.
Good Sunday morning. We do have a lot to get to this morning, including the growing support for impeachment and President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, now reportedly being investigated for his lobbying work in Ukraine. But we're going to start with breaking news from Syria, where Turkey has unleashed a brutal assault on our allies, the Kurds. That invasion came after President Trump essentially gave Turkey the go-ahead. And NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel is reporting on scenes of alleged atrocities carried out by Turkish-backed Arab militias. And these have been caught on camera. Richard is covering this from northern Syria. And Richard Engel with some very disturbing developments there. Richard, stay safe as you cover this story, and thank you for bringing that important information. Look, President Trump is under fire, even from Republicans, for pulling U.S. troops out of northern Syria. The other battle the president is fighting is impeachment, and it's also the direct result of his own actions. In that case, he's accused of using the power of his office to interfere in a foreign country, Ukraine, for political gain, with Rudy Giuliani as his personal emissary. As a result, we may be seeing the country's most serious constitutional crisis since Watergate.
An illegal, invalid, and unconstitutional bull impeachment.
President Trump lashing out as he grows increasingly isolated.
Impeachment. I never thought I'd see or hear that word with regard to me.
The New York Times reports that the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is under federal criminal investigation into whether he violated foreign lobbying laws in his work in Ukraine. The president seemed to quickly try to distance himself.
Well, I don't know. I haven't spoken to Rudy. I spoke to him yesterday briefly. He's a very good attorney, and he has been my attorney. Yeah, sure.
There is some confusion as to whether or not you still consider him your attorney. Is he your attorney?
Yes, and he's a great gentleman. He was a great mayor. I know nothing about him being under investigation.
Two of Giuliani's business associates, Soviet-born Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, who helped investigate Joe Biden in Ukraine, were arrested late Wednesday, charged with allegedly funneling foreign money into U.S. elections.
This investigation is about corrupt behavior, deliberate law-breaking.
According to the indictment, the two men donated money, violating legal limits, to then-Congressman Pete Sessions, referred to as Congressman 1, asking him for help to remove or recall the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Ivanovich. Sessions then wrote a letter to Secretary of State Pompeo, asking him to consider terminating her ambassadorship. Parnas and Fruman also disguised the source of a $325,000 donation to a pro-Trump super PAC.
I don't know those gentlemen.
You're in pictures
Now, it's
with
possible I have a picture with them because I have a picture with everybody. I don't know. Maybe they were clients of Rudy. You'd have to ask Rudy.
On Friday, Ivanovich testified that Rudy Giuliani and President Trump forced her out of her job because her anti-corruption efforts in Ukraine frustrated their political goals.
Why did you recall her?
I heard very bad things about her. And I don't know if I recalled her or somebody recalled her, but I heard very, very bad things about her for a long period of time.
Republican senators, especially those in tough re-election fights, have ducked direct questions on Ukraine.
I'm asking you if it's appropriate for a president to ask a foreign power to investigate his domestic political rival.
Again,
yes or no?
I would say that I don't know that we have that information in front of us.
Ask a foreign rival to investigate. You know what I've said before. This is
you're
about,
not answering the question. We want to hear from you.
And join.
So there you saw the NBC News Meet the Press news summary. Like I said, I cut out the Richard Engel report with a lot of footage, including the atrocities and the escaping ISIS prisoners. You'll see that reported again in some of the news summaries I'm about to show you. Right, I have two more brief news summaries here. And the one thing I wanted to say about that I've seen a lot of commentators talking about the repeated betrayal of the Kurds by the United States, going back to George H.W. Bush in Desert Storm, Gulf War I, where George H.W. Bush asked the Kurds to rise up against Saddam Hussein and then left them to be massacred eventually, even with poison gas. But actually, if you are, I happen to have a history degree from an Ivy League university. That's one of the things that qualifies me to do this Sunday live clip roundup every Sunday, I guess. And one of the things I learned in my study of history, if you go back about 100 years, there was this president of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, not the greatest guy, had some racism problems. Also, there was a point during his presidency where actually I think his wife was in charge because there was no 25th Amendment. But other than all that, he did have, at the end of World War I, Wilson's 14 points that had a lot of great democratic principles in there, despite all the deficiencies of Woodrow Wilson. And if you read those 14 points very carefully, you will find a promise of self-determination to the Kurds, because, of course, the Ottoman Empire was breaking up back then, and didn't happen, still hasn't happened. Kurds apparently are still getting screwed, and you saw that was mostly cut out, but somewhat covered in that last news clip I showed you. And the next news summary is from CNN State of the Union, Jake Tapper, where he first, of course, as usual, Jake Tapper always says, what's the State of the Union this week? And if you're following along on my clip list, at the link I put down in the video description, and now I'm looking at the PDF here, State of the Union is just trying to keep up with, all the breaking news this week, and includes both impeachment and Syria. And like I said, this is a brief news summary from CNN State of the Union that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is just trying to keep up. President Trump is attempting to defend himself on two fronts this weekend. First, he's railing against the impeachment inquiry led by Democrats in the House, and we have breaking news on the conflict in Syria. The Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, announced this morning But the president is now ordering most of the remaining U.S. forces to withdraw from the northern part of that country in the wake of unrest caused by the president's initial order for some U.S. service members to pull back from the Turkish border in Syria. That move, which affects 1,000 service members this morning, comes as the president is already defending himself against criticism from some of his strongest supporters over the initial withdrawal, which essentially gave Turkey a green light to attack America's strongest allies in the region, the Kurds, who have been stalwart and lost thousands in the fight against ISIS. Turkey claims it is targeting terrorists, but the current situation has become increasingly desperate. Civilians have been killed. According to the UN, more than 130,000 people in the region have been displaced, and horrific videos are circulating that appear to show Kurdish innocents slaughtered. CNN has additionally learned in exclusive reporting that the commander of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Army told a senior U.S. diplomat, quote, "You have given up on us. You are leaving us to be slaughtered." Joining me now, a 2020 Democratic president.
And I'm not going to have a Pete Buttigieg clip there, but the sun is almost set. I think my light is starting to equalize a little bit here. I hope I'm not so much in shadow anymore, like Phantom of the Opera style or whatever was going on before. And I'll, like I said, at the end, when I don't have a Dash and Sandy clip, but since I'm not at home, I will have a still photo of Dash and Sandy from the pet sitter and an explanation of why I'm not at home with Dash and Sandy. That'll be all the way at the end of the program. But I have one more news summary before I get to the newsmaker clips, starting off with Adam Schiff, who basically explains why some of the developments this week are really good building blocks to impeachment, and why depositions, secret, non-public depositions, are important as building blocks to later public testimony. And I not only have that history degree from an Ivy League university, I also spent several years as a criminal defense attorney, a public defender, so I know how to use depositions. Not in California, they don't let us do depositions as criminal defense attorneys in California, but in Missouri, where I was a criminal defense attorney before, we could use depositions, and it's a great way to pin people down before you have your actual public cross-examination of them. And Adam Schiff explains that, and I'll supplement that when I get to that newsmaker clip, but that's the clip after next. The next clip is actually ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where White House correspondent Jonathan Karl was the guest host this week. And you'll see he also talks about the impeachment stuff and the Syria stuff, but then also adds in the possible China deal. And they talked about that somewhat on Fox News Sunday. Like every week, Trump says he's made a deal with China, and he never actually makes a deal with China. But then the stock market goes up. Like I think I saw some pundit on one of the shows say that about the stock market going up every time they claim to have a deal with China that isn't really a deal with China. And they had Steve Mnuchin on. I'm not going to show the Steve Mnuchin clip. The only ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos clip, or this is actually the Jonathan Karl interview I'm going to show, is the Bernie Sanders clip at the very end about where he actually attacks Elizabeth Warren, because I think he's down in third place in the initial battleground states in this new CBS poll. I'll also show you before I show the Bernie Sanders clip. But before I get to all that, this is the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary. Very brief, less than a minute, at the very beginning of the program from Jonathan Karl this morning over here.
Jonathan Karl.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. From the impeachment inquiry to a possible breakthrough with China, there is a lot to get to this morning. But first, we turn to the breaking news out of Syria. A senior U.S. official tells ABC News at least 23 ISIS prisoners are believed to have escaped since Turkey began its military offensive against the Kurds in Syria last week. Over 200,000 people have been displaced, and civilians in northern Syria are now going to U.S. bases seeking protection. It's a crisis that began after President Trump announced he was withdrawing U.S. troops from Syria's border. ABC News senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell is on the ground in northern Syria and joins us now with the latest. Ian.
So yeah, like I said, I'm not going to show the serious stuff. I saw people discussing the echo. Yeah, I did choose a big room here because I wanted to show some of this background bay. There's a bay behind me and some trees, and I'll explain. I don't know why everyone's discussing the acoustics. I mean, hopefully you can at least understand what I'm saying. I'm sorry if there's an echo, but I'm in a very large room here with high ceilings. So, but I thought it was going to give me the best light here since I don't have actual studio lights. But anyway, you saw Karl do his news summary there that I thought focused on the China thing a little bit too much because they had Steve Mnuchin as their guest. And now I want to get to the one CBS News Face the Nation clip I have, which is the first newsmaker clip. It's Adam Schiff, who is one of the big leaders on impeachment, and he's talking to Margaret Brennan, talking about what happened this week, why it's important, and the depositions they did. And then Margaret Brennan says, well, you know, for the last 2 weeks, people are confused about what you're doing. We did this poll, and Americans, like 50-50, half of America is confused for the last 2 weeks about what you're accomplishing in this impeachment thing. And then Adam Schiff talks about how even though they're not doing public hearings, they are doing depositions, and they're getting people on the record, because you saw some of the public hearings, like the Corey Lewandowski hearing, where, I mean, it was like a circus. And what you want to do, and when I was a criminal defense attorney, a public defender back in Missouri, I was able to depose witnesses before trial. And in the event you actually get to trial, like the public part, if they deviate at all from the facts that you've nailed them down to saying in their deposition, you can like waive the deposition transcript and say, well, that's not what you said under oath when I deposed you back on whatever date it was. And are you lying now, or were you lying then? And that's a way to really keep a short leash on a witness if you have them with the testimony that you want them to say under oath in a prior deposition. That is a great way to nail down testimony. And I think that is the point that you'll see Adam Schiff make in the second part of this answer. And the first part, I think, is a good roadmap to the facts that have been established this week in those depositions that I'll talk about a little more with you after we watch that clip together over here.
Well, I want to get to the other big topic, and that is the impeachment inquiry that you are leading. Do you see this widening?
Well, we're keeping our focus right now on the president's coercion of an ally, that is Ukraine, to create these sham investigations into his political opponent. We have discovered in very short order not only the contents of that call, but also the preparatory work that went into that call, the effort to condition something the Ukrainian president deeply sought, and that was a meeting with the president to establish that this new president of Ukraine had a powerful patron, the president of the United States, that was of vital importance to Ukraine, was being conditioned on digging up dirt on the Bidens.
So you see that as the quid pro quo, well, not just the military aid?
First of all, there doesn't need to be a quid pro quo. But it is clear already, I think, from the text messages, that this meeting that the Ukraine president sought was being conditioned on their willingness to interfere in the U.S. election to help the president. That is a terrible abuse of the president's power. Now, whether that abuse goes further, that is the withholding of military aid also as leverage, there's certainly strong indications that that is true as well, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. But here you have a president of the United States abusing his power to the detriment of our national security, and doing so to get yet another foreign country to intervene in our election. It's hard to imagine more of a corruption of his office than that.
When will you begin to hold public hearings? So the polling that CBS has done has shown that Americans really are not clear on what to think about this impeachment inquiry over the past 2 weeks of work you've done.
Well, actually, I think that the public attitudes have swiftly moved in strong support of the impeachment inquiry. And what we were trying to do is do a methodical and yet with a sense of urgency investigation of these matters.
Well, the Republicans say it's behind closed doors so you can cherry pick information to be released.
The Republicans would like nothing better because they view their role as defending the president, being the president's lawyers. If witnesses could tailor their testimony to other witnesses, they would love for one witness to be able to hear what another witness says so that they can know what they can give away and what they can't give away. There's a reason why investigations and grand jury proceedings, for example, and I think this is analogous to a grand jury proceeding, are done out of the public view initially. Now, we may very well call some of the same witnesses or all the same witnesses in public hearings as well. But we want to make sure that we meet the needs of the investigation and not give the president or his legal minions the opportunity to tailor their testimony and, in some cases, fabricate testimony to suit their interests.
You've been, well, the whistleblower has made these complaints.
And by the way, if you want to see Adam Schiff there answer questions about the whistleblower and his communications with the whistleblower and the statement he made that the Washington Post gave him multiple Pinocchios for saying that he hadn't had contact with the whistleblower. I mean, he said we haven't talked to the whistleblower when he personally hadn't, but a staff member of his had talked to the whistleblower before they filed their complaint. And of course, Trump made a big deal out of that. And so if you want to see the rest of that interview with Margaret Brennan on CBS's Face the Nation, there's a link down in the video description where you can see the entire Face the Nation program cut up into different constituent videos on the Face the Nation YouTube channel. And I wanted to compare that to one more Democrat before I get to three, well, maybe 2.5 Republicans as to the different talking points on impeachment. This is sort of a supplement to the Fox News Sunday news summary I showed earlier, where Chris Wallace and Kevin Corke actually gave a significant number of facts about Trump's abuse of power and lawless behavior that is the subject of the current impeachment inquiry involving Ukraine. And that also came out in significant degree in Chris Wallace's interview of a Democrat in the Senate, Chris Van Hollen. And I want to show you that before I show you the Republicans who are not really sounding so good in terms of the facts. I'm going to show you Rand Paul and then from Republican from Kentucky, and then the second senator will be Kevin Cramer, who is from a very red state. I think it was North Dakota, South Dakota? No, North Dakota, I'm pretty sure. But before I get to that, I'm going to show you one more Democrat. This is Chris Van Hollen talking to Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday this morning, getting out a lot of facts about Donald Trump's abuse of power and criminality over here.
We'll muster the bipartisan will to do something quickly.
I want to ask you in two quick questions in the time we have left about the other big story in Washington, which is impeachment. You have now, since the Zelensky phone call, rough transcript was released, you have now supported the House impeachment inquiry. From what you have seen so far, do you believe that there is sufficient evidence that the president should be removed from office?
Well, Chris, what we've seen from this president in that transcript and other actions is a president who was abusing his power, using the power of the office of the presidency to try to get a foreign government, the Ukraine, to interfere on his behalf in an American election. And the evidence is also mounting that he withheld vital U.S. military assistance to Ukraine that they need to stop Russian aggression. In my view, that is an impeachable offense. But the hearings will have to collect the evidence, and the president and the White House will have an opportunity to put forward any exculpatory evidence they want. So I won't reach any final conclusion until all the evidence is in, but the evidence that is in is very damning of the president's actions.
And finally,
and the fact that they refuse, the fact, Chris, that they refuse to present the information. You asked the secretary about documents about the Ukraine arms sales. The fact that they refuse to present more information suggests that they don't have any exculpatory evidence.
And very briefly, even if all 47 Democrats were in the Senate to vote to remove the president, you would still need 20 Republicans to get to the supermajority of 67. At this point, and again briefly, do you see any chance that 20 Republicans are going to jump ship, Senate Republicans jump ship on the president and vote to remove him?
Chris, I'm not going to prejudge anything because there's still a lot of evidence to come in. The evidence about this administration withholding very important military assistance to Ukraine while the president tried through his lawyer Giuliani and others to try to get Ukraine to interfere on President Trump's behalf in an election. As that evidence comes in, I hope people will take a very close look at it and ask themselves, what would they have been doing and saying if President Obama had done something like that?
Senator Van Hollen, thank you. Thanks for your time today. Always good to talk with you, sir.
So there you go. Oh, look, I'm like showing you the entire impeach Trump t-shirt here. That this, like I said, this is not the exact design I'm going to be offering sometime a little later from my patrons on Patreon and various other ways that you can contribute financially to my channel if you want me to keep making these videos and covering the impeachment. I've been wanting to cover the impeachment, and now we're actually going to get to cover the impeachment, and I think I've made my personal position on the impeachment pretty clear. My personal position on the impeachment of Donald Trump is impeach Trump. Impeach Trump. That's, anyway. That I showed you some Democrats there laying out the criminality, the abuse of power, just on the whole Ukraine situation. And now I want to show you some of the obstacles. You know, I've talked about impeachment. Of course, if you have your Constitution, this is my ACLU pocket Constitution. I'll talk about a little bit later, clip after next. That's going to come up when Jim Mattis talks to Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press. But before I get to that, impeachment is the House of Representatives has the sole power of impeachment, but removal requires 2/3 of the Senate, and that means over 20 Republican senators. And if you don't convince people like, I don't know, well, this next guy, Kevin Cramer, he's from one of the reddest states, North Dakota, and you can see he is like buying the Trump talking points on this whole Ukraine scandal, hook, line, and sinker. Like every question that Jake Tapper asks him, it's like, Hunter Biden, what about Hunter Biden? What about Hunter Biden? What about Hunter Biden? And the question, and this was a question asked on all the news programs, it's like trying to get Republicans to say that they believe that it is wrong for a president to ask a foreign country to investigate his political rival in the upcoming campaign, which that seems not very controversial, but you won't hear Kevin Cramer say it after 6 minutes 11 seconds of cross-examination by Jake Tapper this morning on CNN's State of the Union over here.
I want to turn to the impeachment inquiry in the House. The president obviously under fire for asking Ukraine and China to investigate the son of former Vice President Joe Biden, one of his top political rivals for re-election. As a hypothetical, just because I think there are a lot of people concerned about the precedent this is setting, would you have found it acceptable if, ahead of the 2012 election, then President Obama had asked a foreign leader to investigate one of Mitt Romney's sons? Would that be okay with you?
Well, I think if the corruption involves a former vice president or a former president, an administration official, rooting out corruption in other countries was something that Democrats thought they were doing with the Mueller investigation. They were pushing hard for
there's no evidence
this kind
of corruption
of
in this.
thing.
There's no evidence of corruption in this case.
Well, other than the vice president bragging in front of a video camera about holding up $1 billion worth of military assistance to Ukraine until such time as they call off an investigation into his son's
that's not what happened,
relationship with a gas company.
Sir, but that's not what happened. I mean, Joe Biden and the Obama administration and the European Union and the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and anti-corruption crusaders in Ukraine all wanted this one prosecutor who was not moving on corruption. They all wanted him fired, and Vice President Biden did say that he wanted him fired, but there's no evidence that had anything to do with the gas company that Hunter Biden was advising. So there's no evidence of corruption. I understand that there's an appearance of impropriety or an appearance of a conflict of interest, and that's a fine allegation for people to say, but that's not what you just said.
Well, I think that we could probably understand why President Trump, after a couple of years of Mueller investigation, $30 million with zero evidence as well of collusion with the Russians, would be a little bit frustrating.
Well, but I guess my question is, do you think it's appropriate for a politician to use his position in foreign policy to push a foreign leader to investigate a political rival? It's just a yes or no. Is it appropriate or is it not appropriate?
Well, if the political rival happened to have been the vice president of the United States and this corruption was being investigated even prior to his bringing it up, and by the way, it's not like Donald Trump has been exactly covert about this. There's great integrity in his authenticity, which is something that people out here in the heartland appreciate about him. So he has these discussions in wide open. He released the entire transcript of this supposed phone call that supposedly had all of this quid pro quo, which once again proved to not be true. There was no quid pro quo in the phone conversation. So no doubt that the haters are going to hate, and they're going to try to create this narrative for forever and ever, but ignore the fact that for 2.5 years we had to endure a Mueller investigation or a Russian collusion investigation that proved to actually exonerate the president.
I don't know that it exonerated him, but beyond that, I'm just talking about this precedent that a lot of people are concerned about. And in terms of the quid pro quo, I don't think it's been established that there was no quid pro quo. We're going to have testimony later this week from the ambassador to the EU about whether or not there was a quid pro quo. There's the charge d'affaires in the U.S. embassy in Ukraine. A guy named William Taylor texted, quote, "Are we now saying that security assistance and a White House meeting are conditioned on investigations?" To which the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, wrote back, "Call me." So there was at least a concern that there was a quid pro quo. I don't know that it's been established one way or another. That you're just asserting that there isn't one. I certainly think it's worth investigating, don't you?
Well, if it is, then it's certainly worth investigating whether Hunter Biden used his status as the son of the vice president to fly around the world on Air Force Two and gaining all kinds of government contracts and positions with companies that he has no qualifications to serve for, and getting a large paycheck as a result of it. So maybe it's all worthy of investigation.
Are you really not capable of answering a question about whether or not it's acceptable for a president to ask a foreign rival to investigate his political rivals, to ask a foreign nation to investigate his political rivals, without bringing up Hunter Biden? I'm not defending Hunter Biden getting these gigs. I'm just saying, can you say that this is a precedent, and now in American foreign policy, it's going to be okay for a Democratic president to push China or Russia or whatever to investigate the children or the family of his political rivals? Is this now the country we're going to live in?
Well, I would say this much, Jake. I appreciate that we have a president who's very transparent about his opinions, and he's very clear about them. He doesn't try to do it covertly. Now, is he pushing them to do it? I don't get the sense that he's pushing them to do it at all. I think he talks. He thinks out loud. He expresses whatever's on his mind, and people can take that and twist it any way they want to. But the new precedent for impeachment is that we don't like this president that just got elected, so we're going to spend all 4 years trying to impeach him. And no, I think we have a far too divided country that is reflected in our politics. And I'd much rather see us have a balanced approach to things, obviously, more dialogue, more things like what you and I are doing right now than these rallies that are surrounded by riots. We have a problem in our country in terms of our dialogue, and we need to fix it. Whether that comes from the top down, I suspect it's probably more likely to come from the bottom up, and I hope that's what happens.
Well, the one thing you and I agree on, sir, is that Carson Wentz is a great quarterback. So I appreciate your time today.
Yes, he is.
Thanks
the best.
Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Coming up, so how are voters?
I don't know why it is people use these sports references to buddy up to people who they disagree with on almost everything, which I guess Jake Tapper was trying to do there at the end. I'm not a big football fan. I don't even know what he was talking about there, but I do think that Jake Tapper did a pretty good job there cross-examining Kevin Cramer, the reddest of red senators from North Dakota, who I don't think he's going to be one of the 20-plus senators who side with the Democrats to remove Trump from office after the House impeaches Trump. Not that that's even going to happen, but he's going to be like one of the last senators, I guess, who's going to side with the Democrats to remove Trump from office in the Senate after the House impeaches him sometime this year. As I said at the beginning, is becoming more and more certain. And I want to show you one more clip of a Republican trying to stick to some of these talking points about impeachment from the Trump administration. Like I said, I thought Jake Tapper did a great job there of cross-examining Kevin Cramer. This is Rand Paul, senator from Kentucky, over on NBC News' Meet the Press, where Chuck Todd, I think, does a pretty good job of pointing out the flaws in what Rand Paul is saying. He does this whole both sidism, well, of course Trump can ask Ukraine to investigate Biden because there were FBI investigations of Paul Manafort and his dealings with the Ukraine in the prior administration. But of course, what that talking point from Rand Paul misses, and I want to say, and Chuck Todd, I think, actually kind of points this out in some of his follow-up questions. It used to be one of the norms that people held to was the president wasn't supposed to comment on an ongoing investigation. One of the things I want to point out, remember that professor from Harvard, Henry Louis Gates, who got arrested for breaking into his own house by a police officer from Boston, who then President Obama said acted stupidly. And people said, oh my God, President Obama commented on an ongoing investigation that's interfering with the police investigation. And of course, Trump, comments on all these ongoing investigations. And that's the difference that Rand Paul's answer here, talking to Chuck Todd, doesn't include, which is that there's supposed to be independence between the president and the Justice Department. The Justice Department is supposed to investigate people when they have enough evidence to constitute probable cause. Probable cause, look at your Constitution, Fourth Amendment, probable cause to for a search warrant or for an arrest. It's, you need some sort of evidence to start an investigation, and it's supposed to be done by the FBI, which is supposed to be an independent agency from the political branch. But Rand Paul can't see the difference between the FBI investigating Paul Manafort for crimes for which he is now serving prison time, and Donald Trump saying, investigate my political rival, please, Ukraine. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch Rand Paul making that stupid analysis with Chuck Todd doing some good cross-examination over here.
World to motivate them to attack again.
On the issue of impeachment and what's been going on, I'm curious, are you disturbed at all by the role Rudy Giuliani's been playing as a private citizen here, possibly dabbling in foreign affairs in ways that, frankly, is now being investigated, but there seemed to be almost like a shadow foreign policy that he might have been running. Does that bother you at all?
I think what's interesting about this is both sides seem to be doing the same thing. If anything is consistent here, it's that both parties have tried to involve themselves in Ukraine. So, for example, 4 senators, Democrats, wrote a letter to the Ukrainian government and said, if you don't keep investigating Trump, we may reconsider our bipartisan support for your aid. Both parties seem to be doing this, and that's why I think ultimately the American people are going to say, they're going to throw up their hands and say, well, Biden threatened the aid, you know, Menendez threatened the aid, Murphy threatened the aid.
I understand that they could get gaslit and think that it's all equal and both sides of it. But I'm talking about specifically.
I mean, it's an argument. I think it is an argument that they're both doing the same thing.
Well, didn't 2 wrongs make a right?
Well, what I would do is I wouldn't give them any aid. I wouldn't give them any aid because we don't have any money. We're borrowing that money from China to send it to Ukraine. So I disagree with trying to manipulate them in any way. I just wouldn't give them the aid, period. I wouldn't say you get the aid if you do X for me. Right. I would say we don't have the money. Let's take care of stuff at home. Let's build roads and bridges in America, not over there.
Are you comfortable with the role Rudy Giuliani's been playing on behalf of the president?
I don't really know enough about what he's doing. I knew he traveled over there to try to seek information on Hunter Biden's corruption. I think a lot of Americans see the $50,000 a month Hunter Biden was making, and it doesn't pass the smell test. I think most people do think there was some corruption involved with Hunter Biden, and I hope we do get to the bottom of it.
All right, I see that you wanted to get that in there. So you think it's perfectly legitimate for the president to use his personal attorney to go to a foreign country and seek help for a political campaign?
I think it's equally as legitimate as the Democrats going there and saying, hey, we should investigate Trump. They really did. Menendez and 4 other senators
They were talking about
wrote a
Paul
letter.
Manafort, who was doing some shady business, who's now in jail for the business he was doing.
But Democrat senators did the same thing. Well, here's the thing is, if you're going to condemn Trump, you need to condemn the Democrat senators. And it shouldn't be just one-sided. Everybody's going after President Trump. Someone needs to actually, in an objective way, evaluate a letter from 4 Democrats that said to Ukraine, if you don't keep investigating Trump, we will reconsider our bipartisan support for aid. That's a threat, and that's the same kind of stuff they're accusing Trump of, but nobody's talking about that the Democrats are doing exactly the same thing.
Unfortunately, I'm out of time. Senator Rand Paul, good luck with your new book. Thanks for coming on and sharing your views. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
When we come back.
So, I don't know, what do you think about Chuck Todd's cross-examination of Rand Paul there? I mean, I think he did point out the Paul Manafort paradox there, that the FBI investigated Paul and Robert Mueller, a special prosecutor who was supposed to be divorced from politics, investigated Paul Manafort and got a guilty plea, and of course, not only a guilty plea, but a jury trial that found him guilty, including a pro-Trump juror who said, you know, I didn't want to convict him until I saw all the evidence, and, you know, the law is the law and the evidence is the evidence, and that's all we can hope for, I guess, from the Republicans in the Senate, who are going to have to decide whether they're going to take this impeachment from the House and look at the real evidence, or just play politics and put it aside. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but there are also some former Trump officials who have things that they might be willing to say or able to say, and haven't really spoken out. There's Rex Tillerson, who was Secretary of State, and apparently at times when Trump asked him to do things that were illegal. And then there was Jim Mad Dog Mattis, who was Secretary of Defense, and he isn't really talking much about the bad things he witnessed Trump do during his tenure as defense secretary, because apparently he doesn't want to, break that norm of not talking bad about his boss while his boss is still in office. But I think there are some important, subtle ideas about what Jim Mattis actually thinks about Donald Trump. And of course, there are some important references to the U.S. Constitution and also having a copy of your pocket Constitution available at all times, which I'll talk about a little more after we watch that final. This is sort of a Republican. I think Jim Mattis is a Republican, although Trump accused him of being a Democrat, which may be why he's saying what he's saying, that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together from NBC News' Meet the Press together over here.
We're reliable.
When you have said, if you feel like you need to speak out more, you will. You'll know what that looks like. That seems to think that you do have more to say. You just don't believe this period of time is appropriate.
Well, Chuck, I have a lot of faith in the American people. They know how to vote. They don't need military generals telling them that they think this political assessment is the one they should go with or the other one is, that sort of thing, especially as corrosive as the political debate has grown in the country. This would be the worst time, I think, for military people to step out like that. But also, the Constitution, I think, is a very hardy document. I've got a love affair with the U.S. Constitution. I actually used to read it about once a year and always found something new in it. So
I always carry one with me.
Well, and I admire that.
All the time because you need it.
I had a pocket version myself. I didn't carry it all the time, but I carried it a lot of days.
I used to not carry it all the time. I need it more often these days.
We all need it today.
I also asked General Mattis whether President Trump had ever asked him, by the way, to meet with Rudy Giuliani. Mattis said unequivocally no. There's much more in this interview, and you can see it in its entirety at meetthepress.com. When we come back, impeachment, Syria, the
So, yeah, I wanted to show that. I actually wasn't even going to take another clip from NBC News' Meet the Press, but then when they talked about the pocket Constitution, of course, for many years now, I think I've been giving away these pocket Constitutions for people who, well, at the $5 level, either on Patreon or through PayPal at links down in my video description. At the $5 level, you get this hashtag LiberalViewer sticker that is on weather-resistant vinyl. And then at the $10 level, you get the sticker plus this ACLU Constitution that you can read through and find out about impeachment being the sole power in the impeachment is in the House of Representatives, and then 2/3 of senators are required to remove the president, and all of that is in your pocket Constitution that I have been giving out, and I've been supporting, or not supporting, I've been advocating that people read their Constitution, just like James Mattis and Chuck Todd talked about in that last clip. And before I get to my bonus Dash and Sandy still photos from the pet sitter, since I don't have Dash and Sandy where I am, I'm away from home, and I will also explain why I am away from home after I get to my final topic. This is the 2020 Democratic presidential debate presidential candidate update as a preview to the debate that's coming up on Tuesday, and I definitely plan to do a Democratic debate clip roundup, maybe not Tuesday night, but maybe sometime Wednesday afternoon, sometime within 24 hours of the debate, depending on how long it takes me to take the clips and figure out what I want to say about them. And so that is an extra live stream I will be doing this week after this will be the most amount of candidates on a single stage. I think it's 12 candidates, the same 10 from last month, plus Tulsi Gabbard and Tom Steyer, who so that'll be 12 candidates all on one stage. And one thing I wanted to point out before I show the final clip here of Bernie Sanders, and he did an exclusive interview over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos with the guest host, their White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl. And he interviewed Bernie Sanders coming back from his heart attack, and he talked extensively about his heart attack, and I didn't take any of that. You can watch the interview at a link down in the video description to the entire ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos program from this morning. But the clip I wanted to show you is Bernie Sanders pretty much attacking Elizabeth Warren for saying she was capitalist in her bones. And this may be because in the early states, Bernie Sanders has slipped to third place, and Elizabeth Warren, the candidate who I've been leaning towards supporting, has gone into first place with Biden in second place. This is in this CBS Face the Nation poll. I'm not going to show you that whole clip, but you can see Elizabeth in the early contests. I believe that's Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. I think it's those four. I might be wrong about that, but those are the four earliest primaries, plus, of course, Iowa's a caucus state. And you can see Elizabeth Warren is the front runner because the margin of error is only 1.6% in this poll. And so outside the margin of error, she's in first place, Biden is in second, and Bernie Sanders is in third place, which may explain why in this final news clip I'm going to show you, Bernie Sanders, I mean, he says Elizabeth Warren is his friend, and it's not like a Donald Trump attack, but he does attack Elizabeth Warren in the final news clip over here.
I am more committed to that struggle than I was a few weeks ago.
So let me ask you, you and Elizabeth Warren have pretty close to identical positions on the big issues. What do you say to those who say that they would pick her because she's 8 years younger than you, she didn't just come through this, didn't just have a heart attack, and look, in the positions, you're pretty much the same?
Well, look, every American is going to make his or her own choice about the candidate that they want. And Elizabeth Warren has been a friend of mine for some 25 years. And I think she is a very, very good senator. But there are differences between Elizabeth and myself. Elizabeth, I think, as you know, has said that she is a capitalist through her bones. I'm not. I think the situation today that we face in this country of the greed and the corruption that is existing in Washington, that is existing at the corporate elite level, where you have massive amounts of price fixing going on in the drug companies, where we're the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people, where we have right now, as we speak, in the fossil fuel industry, you got companies making billions of dollars a year in profit. Doing what? Oh, by the way, they're destroying the planet. All right. And I think business as usual and doing it the old-fashioned way is not good enough. It's not regulation. Now, what we need is, in fact, I don't want to get people too nervous, we need a political revolution. I am, I believe, the only candidate who's going to say to the ruling class of this country, the corporate elite, enough with your greed and with your corruption. We need real change in this country.
So you don't think that's what Elizabeth Warren is saying?
Well, look, Elizabeth is a friend of mine. She will speak for herself. I've just told you what I view.
But you have said there are differences, and you just mentioned a label.
Well, it's not a label. I mean, Elizabeth considers herself, if I got the quote correctly, to be a capitalist to her bones. I don't. And the reason I am not is because I will not tolerate for 1 second the kind of greed and corruption and income and wealth inequality and so much suffering that is going on in this country today, which is unnecessary.
She's built her campaign about having a plan for everything, but she hasn't.
So, like I said, you can see Bernie Sanders there. That sounds almost like some of the attacks he made on Hillary Clinton, not like personal attacks, but policy attacks or attacks on specific quotes of things she said or things that she'd done, and that's an attack on Elizabeth Warren that I predict you will hear Elizabeth Warren respond to on Tuesday in the Democratic debate that I will be covering this week, and you can look for that probably, like I said, on Wednesday afternoon sometime, but maybe earlier. I'll see how things go. Right now, I'm not even in my home studio. As you can see, I did bring my one new Jim Crow book to be I don't have my whole bookcase. Now it's all dark out there, but before you could see this bay up in Northern California, I think I mentioned this last week. I am up in the northernmost part of Northern California on Parents' Weekend at the college where my daughter is attending college to visit her. If at the very beginning of this video, you hear my daughter, like 10, 12 years ago, say LiberalViewer presents as a young child. Well, now she's actually in college, and so here I am in one of the weird places in California where you can actually see the sun rise over water, even though we're on the West Coast, and that's why I was looking into the sunset with water behind me on this bay. I wanted to show this is a picture I took this morning. Wait, let me see if I can get this. Wait, before I finish up. Yeah, here is a picture I took this morning of sunrise over water, which, because the sunrise is in the east, on the West Coast, you don't normally get to see sunrise over water. And that's the same bay that's behind me right now. And before I finish, I do want to show you some still photos from Dash and Sandy that I promised. This is the pet sitter back in my home studio watching Dash and Sandy. Here they are. Sorry, I guess the dash from inside the door was turned. I didn't turn it the right way. And before I finish, I do want to thank the Super Chat contributors who I saw before I got to this point in the program. I did have several Super Chat contributors asking questions about where I am, and various, here they are. And like I said earlier, down in the video description, there's a link where you can be a monthly supporter of my channel. If you like what I'm doing here, at the $5 level, you get the sticker. At the $10 level, you get the sticker and the ACLU Constitution. But before Halloween, I'm hoping to be offering not this exact impeach Trump shirt, but another one that I'm going to get printed locally, probably a white shirt with red letters. I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but look forward to that. And like I said, this week I will be doing a live stream roundup of the Democratic debate on Tuesday. And until that live stream and until next Sunday, I hope you appreciate all the time and effort, even when I'm on the road here, that I put into giving my commentary and criticism for the Sunday morning news analysis shows every week for the last 338 weeks, and hopefully through the entire Trump administration, which will end soon enough. Impeach Trump, even if he's not removed. I think it will help in his non-election in 2020. You can let me know what you think down in the video description, and I will read it and respond to it, hopefully. And until next week, or until the debate, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.